Evening, everyone. I guess a lot of people are joining us already, so I will wait a little bit until we officially start. I wish you all a wonderful evening. It is my honor and great privilege to welcome you all, Rotarians and non-Rotarians alike, to our very first event of District 7080's Environment Community Speaker Series. My name is Suzanne Spinden, and I am a member of the newly formed Environmental Committee of our district, and I am a member of the Rotary Club of Orangeville, and I will function as a moderator. As the Rotarians among you will already know, Rotary International will have a new area of focus starting July 1st, and that new area of focus is the environment. For this reason, an environmental committee was formed, and it was then decided to offer speaker series for Rotarians and anyone who is interested. And this brings us to today. As this is a webinar, please note that we kindly ask you to put any questions you may have during the presentation into the Q&A area, and these questions will be answered at the end of the presentation. Also note that the chat function has been disabled, and therefore, again, please only use the Q&A box. And without further delay, I would like to introduce to you Dr. Nagwa Abu El Naga, who will introduce our guest speaker.
Hello, everyone, Rotarian and non-Rotarian. Thank you for attending the first webinar of the series of environmental webinars. My name is Nagwa Abul Naga, and I am a member of the environmental committee of the district, and I am the director of the retractor of the district, and a member of Mississauga Rotary. I have the pleasure to introduce Professor Herbert Sinnock, and Herbert Sinnock was having the position of director and still having the position of director of sustainability for Sheridan College in Oakville, Ontario. And Dr. Sinnock responsible for all aspects of corporate sustainability vision, strategy and culture, including implementation of Mission Zero, the landfill and greenhouse gas emissions. Professor Sinnock is an energy engineer with 25 years experience working in commercial industrial energy, assessment, project management, teaching, and product development. He is certified energy manager, certified measurements and verification professional, certified building commissioning professional, and lead green associate. Professor Sinnock holds the US patent for the distributed energy neural network integration system, is a senior member of the Association of Energy Engineers and Institute of Electrical and Electronics Engineers. Professor Sinnock has passion. His passion is driving transformational change throughout organizations of all scale and scope, with a focus to realizing a livable future for all species on the earth. Thanks, Professor Herbert Sinnock, and we look forward to listen to you.
Thank you so much for that gracious introduction. All of it really to say I've been doing this a long time, but it really is my pleasure to be here speaking with you this evening. I'm just going to take a second to pull up my slides, which I hope you can see now. And, you know, I really impressed by the intersection of Rotary International's work with so many of the sustainable development goals we see out of the UN. You're clearly, as an organization, a global driver of the kind of change we need, and even locally as well. I took note of the Rotary Great Lakes watershed cleanup. You know, in that you're serving a watershed area. It's the source of water for 40 million of us humans, and home to, you know, I can only guess how many animal and plant species. So really impressive work. Keep it up. Today, or tonight really, I guess what I'd like to share are 3 stories from Sheridan's work that I hope would inspire you, that help you see the potential of institutional players in our communities and perhaps see that in a bit of a different light. The 3 stories share a common theme of how these relatively introverted campus level efforts to protect the environment have actually ended up branching out beyond our campus boundary and engaged our community in ways that neither we nor they really would have expected. And I would argue in the midst of that institutional players, whether they're your local hospital, the college, the university, or just simply you know, a large corporate partner, they can actually be a perfect catalyst to set some things in motion. So that's the exploration. And it has to start with who's Sheridan? Who's Sheridan in the middle of this? We're a pretty typical larger college. We're similar in many respects to other mature community-based public institutions that you're going to find across the Canada and the US. We're one of 24 institutions that were established through legislation in 1967 to provide collegiate post-secondary education in Ontario. But you'd find in many ways we operate more like a university. And actually day to day, Sheridan doesn't identify itself as being either college or university. We're living in this hybrid mode right now, this gray area, and we're kind of happy in that space right now. We've got 2 million square feet of campuses. They're distributed across 3 of the fastest growing, highly populated communities in Canada. Everything's that we have is just west of Toronto. In a non-COVID year, you'd see 3,000 staff and faculty on our campuses, serving about 24,000 full-time students, another 12,000 part-time. We do everything from 2 to 3 year diplomas and apprenticeships through applied bachelor's degrees, even graduate certificates. And we span health, humanities, arts, social sciences, skilled trades, technologies, engineering, and business. So we're quite expansive. Within the facilities and sustainability portfolio, this is where my team resides. We've been undergoing an evolution of sorts. I created this particular picture a few years ago just to illustrate the spectrum of organizations that you know, you, me, all of us really are encountering in our professional work. And it was my way of trying to capture that we can be anywhere on this spectrum in terms of our intention and planning. And you read it from looking at the bottom. An organization with a reactive perspective is not going to be able to do a planning, anything beyond incremental, what's kind of next? How do I evolve to the next thing? And for the most part, that organization is going to have policy dictated to it and will follow that. And that can be a conscious choice. This is the organization we want to be in. But I would say that if you're in that reactive bubble, you can only do things that are left. Sheridan really wanted to see if it could move to a more proactive space, kind of getting out to that 3rd line on the bottom there. And from there, provide an opportunity to do a level of planning that was more about deeper levels of change. This breakthrough level planning, this idea of kind of backcasting, thinking of the future you want to invent and create that. And it was partly because we wanted to be more self-directed. We wanted that opportunity to define what was going to happen around us rather than have it happen to us. And it's really been the role of my team, both within Sheridan as an organization and as representatives of the organization, to promote the kind of change that is going to push us to that sustainable future. It keeps us constantly operating on the right-hand sides of this graph between breakthrough and transformative planning, where we're really executing within the organization and in our communities programs that involve a number of strategic partners and begin to create new conversations around us. I included this slide just as an upfront to give you a sense of the design thinking we have, like when we're approaching a problem. At a high level, it gives you a sense of what we want to render into practice. So, you know, there are certainly these, with many of our projects like energy, there's this idea of efficiency. Can we do it better? There's the idea that in making it better, let's not make it worse, right? We got to keep it at least as reliable as it was. Don't break it. We're an office for sustainability. We're driving environmental change within the organization. That's clearly a focus area of ours. But we're also a public sector organization funded by taxpayers, with a fiduciary responsibility and a financial responsibility. And we recognize that in the work we do. But I think the two bottom ones are where we get to play something really interesting. It's not just a project with the other parameters and these technical goals, but now an opportunity to take what we do and embed it into curriculum in a way that now the leading practice we implement becomes something we can teach and show our students. And this opportunity as an organization in our community, with peers, with municipal partners, with industry partners, an opportunity to be a role model, to actually really showcase something as new and different. So I hope when you see the three stories unfold, you'll kind of see what I mean by that and how we think about that. And our story starts with waste. I actually found it hard to dig up the old photographs of what we were before. But I did find this one from about 2009. This was an office in our student services that was actually making a committed effort to do something uniquely different within Sheridan of the time. So they gathered up 4 of these blue bins and said, these are our mixed recycling. They found a small black bin that they made landfill, and they brought from home, I would guess, green cart and a kitchen catcher. I can tell you that nothing in the back end of Sheridan at the time would have been able to handle organics waste or really effectively handle the mixed recycling that might come out of the blue bins. So somebody at the end of the day or end of the week was probably taking this home and making a committed effort to make it happen. And then outside on the left, we had these wonderful bins that were given to us. We got to brand them. We branded them kind of generically, hey, sustainability is coming. And they had little slots for cans and slots for paper and slots for landfill. There were no labels on the thing. And as far as I'm concerned, what went inside went to the same place, which was probably the landfill. So we were not in a place where we were proactively managing the environment in any way, shape, or form. So, you know, after studying those options a bit, really kind of looking what's there, we decided on a 3-bin system. We wanted to capture organics with a green bin, a mixed recycling in a blue bin, and a landfill with a landfill waste in a black bin. And we have these plastic billy bins in different sizes. This larger size were placed in sets of 3 in corridors and common areas. We'd had before waste containers in receptacles in classrooms. We pulled those out. And so it ended up being now that a group of classrooms might find waste bins in a nearby corridor, and that's how they would work that. And similarly in offices, we had waste bins all over the place in offices. We created one central station for that. And we introduced these small blue bins and a little landfill catch bin for under people's desks. And the expectation then became, at the end of the day or the end of the week, you would take your waste to the larger bins and be responsible for how much waste you produced. It was part of changing the culture and mindset for people of how much do we actually generate when we bring in lunch or whatever else. We took paper towels out of the washrooms. We removed the bins from there too. And on the right, you're seeing an iteration of our signage. We had to go through, I think, a dozen iterations of signage just to get it to the point where somebody walking up with a handful of things to go in waste bins could figure out quickly where it was going to go. And really quite an interesting exercise in kind of human engineering of like, how are we going to get through to people that this is what happens when they come up to the bins? I'm wondering if in this photo, this busy photo of our learning commons, you can spot the printers. We have 2 of them and these 3 bins. They're kind of down the center of your screen, and they're in these little wooden carrels. One's facing us, the printer at the bottom, and one's facing away. I wanted to point out these printers. This was part of a push by our IT group. About 2014, they decided we're going to reduce the number of models, the makes, and actually sheer number of printers we've got around the whole facility. They wanted to make repair and maintenance easier. So our sustainability team kind of tagged along. We said, you know, we want your printer to have an EPEAT rating. We want this to be a very energy efficient, and we want it to do automated duplex printing. We want it to print both sides of the paper by default. Can you make that happen? The most novel thing we came up with in that was with our student ID or employee ID, you'd have to swipe or tap to release the print job that you'd sent. So previously what we'd found was mounds of abandoned print jobs. It was just somebody sent it to print, it printed out 1,000 pages of something wrong, and then they just left it because they didn't have time, they had to get to class. Now with the tap feature, we not only release the job only when it's needed and we're certain that's the right thing to print, but that we get a little bit of a charge, a per impression charge that could be charged back to your department, could be charged to your student card, whatever it happened to be. And we saw immediately less paper waste sitting around the printer. We set ourselves in 2014 an ambitious goal that we could avoid 10 million impressions, 10 million prints, 10 million pages of paper. We ended up with 14 million that year. And we were impressed. We said, this is good. This is working well. Year over year, I went to purchasing. I said, how much paper did we save this year? When we got up to about 50 million sheets, we stopped counting. It worked. It was a great program. And it continues to this day. So we found, like, just with a couple of interventions, we had some very quick gains. We got from, what had been teens, like 14% diversion from landfill. In other words, most things are still going to landfill, up to about anywhere from 45 to 60%. So this is talking about a 48% number, a snapshot in time. The reality is, depending on how effective our communication was that year, whether our partners in residences were being really effective in terms of policing waste, it would vary. But it was always right around that kind of 50% mark. Nonetheless, we did see this overall reduction in total volume of waste. About a quarter disappeared entirely, so no more tons of that, period. And a big drop in how much of that was actually going to landfill. So this was big wins for us in fairly short time. But, to this day, contamination, what we call contamination, in other words, wrong thing in the wrong place, it is a big concern. Coffee cups are the big offender. We find food that's left on packaging. We find, that where somebody bought a lunch from Harvey's and put all the things into the bag and stuffed it into the mixed recycling bin. That happens. Or cups with liquid, right? So I didn't finish the pop I drank, so I just threw it all into the bin. So it became this process for us where communication, education, and outreach was all pivotal to sustaining the behavior we wanted over time. And, and that would include even this really targeted communication on particular problems, like how do you split up all the things in your coffee cup to get it to the right place? This is all kind of our fun. But I gotta say, sometimes we had a lot of fun with this. This is a still shot of 3 videos that we commissioned out of our, we have a local production house that creates videos and stuff. They pulled in animation students who created 3 of these videos featuring Robbie the raccoon telling everyone how to sort their waste. You can find these on our Mission Zero page. It's missionzero.sheridancollege.ca. They're great fun to watch. So much talent in the animation team. I didn't mention at the outset, but Sheridan is #1 in the world for animation. So having this talent available to us for something like this was, just blew us away. We were thrilled. And actually these videos ended up featured in a resource management exhibit at the Peel Art Gallery Museum and Archives. They did a whole session called Trash Talk, Local Action, Global Change. And these videos were featured there. So great fun for us. And a couple of years ago, we actually began refreshing and upgrading our bins so we could increase their visibility, improve the branding, make the maintenance easier, support fire safety. And we've got this version actually in an outdoor bin that we're getting ready to deploy. And further, we've kind of begun some discussions with our procurement team all about life cycle resource use. And I think that's the direction that in the next 3 to 5 years is really going to be the biggest traction for us. But of all the things we've done in the waste file, this whole idea of waste as a resource and this idea of creating circular economy, this one's by far my favorite. We adopted this one from the Netherlands. It came to Toronto with the help of our Sheridan sustainability coordinator. And she in turn brought it to Sheridan for us. We run these about 2 times a year. The basic concept is picture a cafe, you meet there informally, but at this particular occasion, this event, there are people there who want to fix things, whether it's your clothing or your electronics or whatever it is, and they're going to meet somebody who brought something from home that's broken and would like to have that fixed. So we get the win of something might get fixed and diverted from landfill. We get this wonderful opportunity to actually have a fixer and a fixee, I guess, come together and actually jointly work on something together to get it back to functioning. This picture I like because it's one of our operations managers from our Mississauga campus who was fixing these headphones for a young man who was our co-op student at the time and ended up working with us for a number of years. And I just love the fact that it's a community around this idea of circular economy that builds community. It boosts this confidence in our ability to actually repair and fix rather than dispose and buy new. And you can see like the joy of this group that's involved in this. Like this is a genuine captured moment, not a posed photo. And you know, I promised that I would talk about community impact, what this meant. So here are 2 examples of how Repair Cafe, originally in a Sheridan context, offered on our campus, became something that happened in the community. And it became a thing that happened in the community again and again. This Chinguacousy Library out in kind of East Brampton area, Bramalea, if you know the area, began hosting these repair cafes on the regular in one of their maker spaces. And in Oakville, we arranged a few of these events with Halton Environmental Network and a few other groups as community events where we could really get at this idea of educating on the circular economy. So here suddenly is traction on a really cool concept in community around waste that started on the campus. So this is my, what's wrong with this picture? I'm flipping pages into biodiversity. What's wrong with this picture? And it's not the people with the chainsaws who look like they're about to clear cut this thing. It's the invasive species in the back. Darren, this is the first poll on our invasive species. I figure we can do this one just as a little quick bit of fun. So how many of you guessed the milkweed? Just out of curiosity. So here's the story with this. Here's common buckthorn. I guarantee you've seen it. It's everywhere. Maybe you didn't realize you saw it. I mean, because it's everywhere. Oh, very good. This is a very educated audience. I'm really glad to see it. So this plant, right? We've got these thistles and these berry clusters, and the birds love these berries. They spread the seeds everywhere. Before long, the thing you're seeing on the right-hand side, this thicket, grows along every creek bed, every green space, and it chokes out absolutely everything else you find in there. Another one, this is the Phragmites. So this plant grows really like creek beds. It likes kind of marshy grounds. It grows like 10 feet to 20 feet. It is enormous, and it outreaches and outgrows and outspreads everything else. It spreads through rhizomes, it spreads through seeds, it's everywhere, and it chokes out everything in the creek beds very quickly, just the same. Purple loosestrife, which I referenced in the poll, but I didn't pull up a picture, does kind of the same thing. just not as aggressively. But it's a pretty flower and people go, oh, that's nice. So we come back to these two. These were representing the first removal of buckthorn on our campus. This was at the front of our campus. I thought it represented not only an incredible loss of biodiversity up in the space at the front, but it screened all the buildings. It created, for me, kind of a safety hazard. It was just not the right thing that should be front and center of our campus. So these folks came through, cut this down to stumps, and then actually came through with a backhoe and cleared out the first 6 inches of soil. Because again, this is really invasive stuff. We did this again actually at the back of campus with a different supplier. In this case, an indigenous group called Guyanase went through and cut to stumps and then applied a little bit of herbicide treatment to the stems, and then put some wood chips over the top to suppress it. So a very different approach, but they both worked quite well. Guyanase also did the removal of the Phragmites, and it was much the same. Cut it down and treat it with an herbicide in a very surgical way over a couple of seasons. And I'm sorry, it's just not a very good photo, but I really didn't have a great one. But here's what we could do with the space we created, removing buckthorn. So at the front of the campus came in this wonderful medicine wheel garden. And I'll point out these the sponsors in here. Like here's TD Friends of the Environment Foundation, Oakville Community Foundation, Oakville Green. Ontario had supplied some funds in relation to it being kind of 50th anniversary of colleges, and probably Canada 150 at the same time. So a lot of interest from the community in what was being created here. And it's really a beautiful garden that really, for our part, was trying to do an honorable rendition of a very traditional medicine wheel garden. You know, the medicine wheel garden speaks to the balance among the 4 aspects of our being: spiritual, emotional, physical, and mental, but also 4 quadrants of plantings of different colors facing north, south, east, west. And very traditional plantings like tobacco, sage, sweet leaf, these traditional medicines and plants all present here. And this is our sustainability coordinator, Wai-Chu Cheng, who's here with our director of Indigenous Engagement, Elijah Williams. So it's the 2 of them together at the garden. In the back here, this is the back area of buckthorn that we cleared, and you can see some trees now starting to come back in this area. But here we actually had an on-campus event where we were welcoming all the staff and faculty back. So hundreds of us there. And we gave everyone the opportunity to plant a wildflower in this area that we'd cleared of buckthorn. And our intention was to bring native species back, but also create a pollinator garden, really create this wonderful space. And here you see also some of our volunteers in here who are working. And we also received a bit of funding here from those same community foundations to begin educating people about what was happening with the pollinators. So this was, what are the pollinators, you know, which are the various pollinators we find, what do they do, but also the various plant species they're attracted to, what you could do at home, how you explore and find these in nature, and a lot of social media around this. And it was really just a nice campaign to kind of circle back on what we'd created a few years before. And it also created space for us to create our first community garden, which I'll admit is sort of Sheridan focused. It's groups of Sheridan teams that come out and tend these. But you know, during a COVID year, we still actually had people out tending the gardens. We grew it like a food garden. We donated the produce to local charities. And then there's an energy story in the middle of it. This is the 3rd story of the piece. So we're back to this planning graph again. And we began this planning kind of outset of 2011 or so. Our task force pulled from across the institution was really thinking here about the objectives of the plan we were going to build. We wanted to begin with the end in mind. We decided really early on that our aspiration was going to be on par with the best in the world. So we looked around and, you know, our energy performance, our environmental performance, we were benchmarking most closely with our peers across North America. Like, frankly, the numbers all lined up. We were pretty average. But our ambition was to match places like Austria, same climate, but about 40% less energy on average. And, similar in terms of the greenhouse gas reductions. And, getting there was going to require that breakthrough level planning. It was going to need us to be more proactive and to backcast and think about how we were going to put it all together. Our goals focused on the technical target of trying to get our energy down by half by 2030, to get our carbon about the same, to give us a decent return on the money we're going to invest, to have a reliable system. But then, because of the nature of the business, we figured in doing something like this, where we're in all of our buildings, where we're building new systems, wow, what an opportunity to teach people something new. And amazing what an opportunity to show communities around us and other institutions and organizations who are asking the same questions and in the same situation as us, here's what might be possible. So this was our focus. This was our ambition as we were looking at it. And we took 3 core concepts all the way through this. The first is we do all of the projects we're going to do together. So it was very common in energy management practice to do one project at a time, or do a couple of projects at a time and try to scoop up the savings and then kind of reinvest them. The problem with that is there are interdependencies. These projects depend on each other. There's a synergy there. We want the sum that's greater than the whole, the whole that's greater than the sum of its parts. And when you begin picking and pulling apart projects, this thing falls apart. The second thing we were really obsessed with was, what is the global best practice? What is the leading jurisdiction doing on this, and how do we imitate it here? And finally, there's a concept that I'm showing here, which is really, really well known in Europe. Surprisingly not prevalent here. It's this idea of Trias Energetica. It basically says there is a preferred order of doing things that will get you the best value for the money. And the thinking there is, start with things that reduce the amount of energy you consume. Make your buildings better, for example. Turn off the lights. These are pretty simple things. Then you get around to, how do we integrate and connect things together in a way that if we were going to be losing energy before, could we recapture it, reclaim it, and use it somewhere else? And then finally, at that point, you've shrunk the whole picture, right? You've actually reduced the amount of energy required. Now we can go and focus on, how do we get the best supply in there, whether it's reliable, flexible, low carbon, low cost, whatever it happens to be. At that point, you're in the best position to shop that. So here's the journey in pictures, just sort of bits and pieces of the whole thing. So submetering, we had all kinds of stuff we couldn't see. How much energy do we use? I don't know. So submetering gave us this opportunity to say, all the energy that's going into a building, we now can quantify it, we can display it, we can analyze it, we can understand it. Now it's manageable. Then there's like it's pretty mundane stuff. We have bad doors, let's fix the doors. We have windows that let in a lot of solar heat gain. Could we make those better? But then we had some of these really kind of exciting projects. Over on the right is this library area. It had a skylight that had been there since the building was created. And I think the idea was maybe to have a greenhouse in there at some point. You can see there's a tree underneath. But essentially what it was a rainforest. It was like anytime it rained inside. So no tables, no carpets, nothing happened underneath. We came through and built this, I think, really wonderfully architecturally beautiful clear story. It really opened up the space, retained all of the daylit brightness, and opened all of this square footage of this library and student space that hadn't been usable before. And all of that, and just in the business of, how do we make the buildings better? Our poor building operators, they couldn't see if something was going wrong. So we gave them some tools to quickly highlight, hey, this room's too cold, this room's too hot, this one's just right. These Goldilocks zones of rooms across our whole facility. So now they had these tools at the ready. They could pull them up and see, is there an area I need to go address and pick up? But again, pretty routine stuff. The lighting was horrendous. In an office one night, I put a little sensor just to measure lighting. It showed me that the lights, for some reason, turned off for the day at about 3 a.m., turned on again at 6 a.m. This is completely random. So this, across this facility, we had lights that were misbehaving. You know, it's lights behaving badly time at Sheridan. So our program was to replace with fewer but better fixtures, typically LED. And then on the right, you see this really quite sophisticated computer that ties to our software program and lets us actually actively program what happens with the lights in the space. And that's not just when they turn on and off, but somebody walks in the room, the occupancy sensor turns on. Is it the time of day where we expect someone to be coming into work, or is it the time of day where we expect a cleaner to come in? We could actually adjust the timing of how long lights stay on. We could also dynamically reprogram a space if it changed uses. Now it's an office, now it's a classroom. Well, we don't have to reprogram, we don't have to rewire lights. We just reprogram. So really tons of flexibility in that. So then it comes this challenge of, you know, we got new buildings coming up. What are those going to look like? And we really wanted to make sure we were beginning to incorporate all of these great energy saving features we saw into buildings that should become the most energy efficient in North America. So this was around the time when we're specifying these when I took a trip to Sweden, and I'm looking at doors with double seals. I'm looking at wall assemblies, triple pane glass, high R value, like very highly insulated and no infiltration, right? So no air getting through these things. And I'm thinking, I've got to bring this back. Every building I walked into had some form of heating that was based on water. So this is actually a shot from one of our new buildings, which is using in-floor radiant heating. Like, we're used to it here, but it's just really, really common in that setup. So I just put up this, this is our Mississauga campus. It's 3 buildings. It's 2 that exist, 1 being constructed. And I like it because it's an evolution of our thinking. The building 1, which is bottom left, was something that we said, build us a LEED building. And we got a LEED gold building. A good concept for its time. It brings in just the amount of ventilation it needs to keep occupants healthy, and it uses 110 water source heat pumps to heat and cool spaces as they need. So if they're occupied and they need cooling, then the heat pump does it. And the idea basically is those are all tied back to a common loop. So it might be that half the building's heating, half the building's cooling, and we're going to use kind of the least amount of energy we need to. But electricity is expensive. Maintaining 110 heat pumps is really expensive. And would you look at how much glass is on that building? All that sunlight, all that heat getting trapped in like a giant greenhouse. So when we measure performance, we talk about this idea of energy utilization intensity. You sum up all of the energy that's consumed in a year, you divide it by the square footage. This building would consume about 277 kilowatt hours for every square meter in a year. You compare that with like an Ontario average, that would be like 330, maybe 350. You compare it though to Germany, a German A-rated building. So at the top of the spectrum at the time would have been low 100s. So low 100s to 277 to our average at 330. Not the best we could do. Building 2 is up at the top there. We constructed this one in 2017. It's also LEED. We asked for a LEED building. It's LEED Gold. Really similar operating concept, just the right amount of ventilation air, but we did all the zone heating and cooling with water like we saw in Sweden. And we added a bunch of really cool features in here. So we've got things like really wicked controls. They just allow us to program almost any situation that's going to happen in the building. We use these things called chilled beams. Really, really uncommon in North America at the time we built, and I think they're slowly coming into practice now. But basically, we can do cooling in a single room with just this device, and we bring all that cooling energy by water to the room. It actually reduces the fan energy, and it makes the building incredibly efficient. We used the opportunity of this building to show everything that was in it. So if we have a heating system, there's a glass door that lets you see how the heating system works. If the envelope is great in a section, then we built a mock-up of it somewhere nearby. So you might walk around the corner and see a model of the building. Just tons of stuff like that. Good insulation, good building envelope. We specified, we told the constructor, we want this to be less than 100 kilowatt hours per square meter per year. We got in the built building 148. Just for reference, this building is 1.5 times the size of that building in phase 1. It is 3/4 of the energy cost in a year. So it matters. Good buildings matter. Building 3, we learned basically everything that went wrong with constructing the building envelope of phase 2. Plus, we managed to tie it in to the phase 2 building so that now we can use the boilers and all the equipment we used in phase 2 and make it actually run better and squeeze more energy out of the whole system. So some really neat opportunities for us to do better. And all of this stuff really quite heavily featured in the industry magazines and in press because it's just interesting and new and novel. I also point out here that we do rainwater capture from the roof, that we use it to flush toilets. And we melt snow rather than applying salt outside our sidewalks. So we've tamed all this energy demand. Our attention now turns to how on earth do we get heating and cooling to this? How do we tie in the existing buildings we've got? How do we build new when we're building out the site? And we look again to Europe. They use these wonderful district heating systems. We talk about district heating in North America. What we mean often is I've got a steam boiler somewhere and I'm sending steam through pipes to somewhere. European style district energy still has some property that needs to receive heat or cool. It has pipes. It has some source of that. It has probably the ability to recover heat from somewhere, but they will always use a pressurized hot water, so only water, not steam. And they'll try to keep the temperature very, very low. The lower they keep the temperature, the more heat they can pull from places where it'd otherwise be rejected to the atmosphere or thrown out. So they've found this way as a path to get to these low carbon integrated community networks. And this is complex. It was complex for us. We wanted to know how we were going to implement this authentically, how are we going to create value, and we had a bigger plan in mind at this point. So we began assembling around us bit by bit a strategic implementation network, partners that could work with us. And we began implementing like crazy. So 2016, we started putting pipes like this in the ground. These are pre-insulated pipes. They're manufactured. They come like a system you put together, part A to part B. They have a rigid jacket, this closed cell insulation. They have leak detection, so we know if they break, and they're meant to be in the ground for 50 to 75 years. And the awesome part is they don't go very deep. They're so fast to put them in. And this is, again, just an area where the Scandinavians and Germans had figured it out over, hundreds of kilometers of this stuff. And yet still in North America, we're trying to figure out how to make this as complicated as possible. Let's put it in a concrete vault. Let's spray foam it. Like it's ridiculous. We even bought the right product, but we put it in wrong. This was, my eyes were rolling back in my head as I'm sort of looking at what we're doing in terms of not honoring the actual intent and method and cost. 2016 in the summer, we had 16 weeks. We put 3.5 kilometers of this pipe in the ground, both Oakville and Brampton. In this picture is actually these long lengths of twin pipe. This is supply and return in one pipe jacket. This is actually a way to save energy. It was the first installation of twin pipe in North America, and it was done at European costs. Expansion for these things, it's engineered into the system. All that you need in order to handle expansion in a system like this are these little foam blocks that I think they might have electrically taped to the to the pipe, but that's all it really needs. So it actually becomes very, very simple, very quick. And as the crews get more experienced, they can do this very fast. This became part of what we started telling the communities around us is, hey, we can do this really fast. We needed a way to put heat in. I was inspired by what I was seeing out there, these architectural masterpieces that were out in our communities in Europe, where they're centerpieces of the community. Could we build something beautiful and functional and highly efficient? This is in our skilled trades building. I glassed it in so the students would go, what's in there? I want to know what that's about. We tour this thing in a non-COVID year all the time with students, with press, community members. We're in there like once or twice a month. This has been very popular as this community feature, and it's really, really pretty. I really like it. It shows up really well. We built one in Oakville. We put it in the basement of an existing building. It wasn't easy, but we did it. And at least we learned. And then we go back to Europe again. We got to connect district energy to buildings. In Europe, they build these all things on a skid packages, everything you need to interface a building, including metering it. And they drop these into a space. Within a few hours, can be connected and commissioned. Meanwhile, in North America, we're building rooms full of equipment, one piece at a time, and then taking months to program it up. It's actually pretty silly when you get to it. So we actually went to the global manufacturers and we said, you know, we want you not only to sell us this authentic thing, but we want you to make it in North America. We want to know that you're committed to the market here. These were built by Danfoss, which is a large global company, and they were made in Michigan and shipped to us, and they're still making them in Michigan. A quick second poll here. This is part of our, so Darren, second poll. This is part of a steam to hot water conversion. So remember I said old district energy in North America, it's all steam, it's high temperature. There's a reason this is not a good idea. So what you're looking at in the picture behind the pole is a mechanical room that we quickly converted to run on hot water tied into the district energy system. Okay, should we show the result? You guys are pretty good. You've gotten 2 out of 2 on this one. It is 65%. When we measured how much energy we dropped into the system and how much actually made it to the buildings, we'd lost most of it. That's the issue with a North American STEAM context, and part of the reason why authentic messages and approaches matter. So it was effective. We really have seen a drop. I want to kind of get to this last piece of community. So we noticed that these district energy networks like we build on our campus are usually really big in Europe, and we wanted to see how on earth do we get our municipalities into that conversation. We want to do that one. So we went to them. Hey, Oakville, should we work together to build a big community energy plan? Can we get our community stakeholders together and build something? Hey, Brampton, can we build a community energy strategy with you? And the staff were very, very receptive. So between 2017, 2018, and about 2020, we worked with community members in these communities, about 900,000 people in total in the communities, represented by 30, 40, 50 task force members, to create these amazing 30-year plans for how are we going to evolve. Brampton had this wonderful land use vision, and we said that needs an energy story. So we began setting up some really basic goals. We simulated all the possible ways we could begin to deflect the business as usual case and really bring the carbon and energy out. It kind of looks like this. Doing a whole bunch of things, retrofits, new transportation options, district energy systems, really radically transforming. We could actually deflect the curve. We could meet the community's goal for 2040, but oops, we missed the federal Paris Accord goal. So now comes the question of, maybe if we get good at bending the curve, we could just run faster and do more. So we simulated that just to see. And yeah, we can actually probably meet a federal goal if we just do more of the same, if we turn the crank a bit faster. So all of this showing us in numerical data as we're talking to this community task force, that it is possible for us to plot a course for these communities that sees us meeting our commitments to the future. So September 2020 saw the unanimous endorsement of the community's plan in Brampton. It was a big milestone for us and for the community, and the same in Oakville in February of 2020. Again, a unanimous decision by council. In Oakville, this has already taken the first steps in implementation. Oakville now has this not-for-profit community organization called Future Energy Oakville. It has its founding board of directors. It is not yet staffed. This board of directors includes Sheridan's Vice President of Finance and CFO. And my team is continuing to engage and advise this group and work with Brampton, who is on its way to actually creating the same kind of entity. We actually had a really fantastic meeting today with the task force on that. So now our little energy story on our campus has become the community story. And that brings me to the conclusion of 3 stories on how a little campus with its own insular ideas becomes part of a community transformation. And you as Rotarians know the power of pulling together community. We're learning to trust and drive that transformation. And I hope this at least inspired you to reach out to those institutional partners you find in your neighborhood and really kickstart some of this change.
Thank you very much, Professor Sinnock, for this. I am looking to see if there are any questions at this point. So if anyone has a question, please put your question in the Q&A box and then we can ask it. But in the meantime, I have a question. I'm fascinated by this topic, and I was wondering if any of your new buildings is using the technology with siding that has integrated solar panels. I know that's one of the newer systems that came up in Europe. And I was wondering if you have any plans on this or using it already.
Not using it yet, would definitely like to do it. There's actually 2 that could be applied that I can think of offhand. I'm sure there are more. One is the building integrated photovoltaics. The idea is basically I can use the same structures I'm using to kind of shade and keep sun out of the building in a direct gain way. In other words, I'm trying not to heat the building. I'd like to provide some shade. Those structures can be architecturally attractive, capturing energy and really creating that electrical energy for us. I'd like to see that in a lot of our future building implementations, because I think it actually is an elegant solution that meets a couple of objectives. Price point would just kind of be the other consideration in it. The second is something called solar wall, which I've seen represented locally. The idea there is a little perforated metal screen that heats in the sun on a south face and can actually preheat air that's going to be used in the building. And I actually have an application in mind for that I'd like to try soon if I can.
No, excellent, thank you. And in the meantime, we got several questions.
Oh, yeah.
So the first one from Michael Payman, what makes the Europeans so more advanced / progressive than Canadians?
I don't think it's a question of sophistication. What it is the imperative was it was just much more urgent and in their face earlier on. So Scandinavia in particular really felt the OPEC oil shock in 73 and 78. Like that hit them very hard. They were very fossil fuel dependent, and vowed pretty quickly that they were going to mobilize to not have that dependency anymore. Part of the approach they then took was this idea that they'd had of central plants and central boilers, these ideas that they'd been using to heat communities, but to take that and try to adapt it and innovate on it and build it forward. So they've basically had a 30, 40, 50-year head start on the conversation of how do we do this well. The interesting piece I find, though, is for some reason we're kind of going la 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 la. Why would we adopt a technology that is created over in Europe. And maybe that's being facetious or disingenuous to our thinking, but I don't see evidence in the products that are being deployed and the approaches taken here that show me that they're looking at the really progressive gains and designs and modularity that's been created there and taking it seriously and integrating it here. So I call that kind of shame on us. I think there, the insular work we've done is hurting us more than benefiting us, and we need to wake up to that.
All right. Well, thank you for that answer. Now, Lori has an interesting question. What about the costs versus benefits? Basically, return on investment.
So the Trias Energetica thing is critical in here. The cost of retrofit and energy efficiency is going to be kind of your lowest first cost in. Just making things work is a pretty low cost venture. The returns there are decent. Can be like almost from like no cost, low cost, you're receiving a significant benefit. It varies across the spectrum. As I start fixing windows and doors, it gets a bit more expensive. My return's a little worse. The idea of the portfolio work and the idea that Trias Energetica points to is if we can work up front to do that low cost, no cost, and efficiency work and really shrink the energy footprint, then all of the subsequent infrastructure investment I'm going to make, the pipes in the ground, the plants, they're all sized smaller. And in sizing them smaller, we're improving the overall return of the entire project. So there is not a hard and fast answer of, it's 10%. There's a situation where you need to evaluate every program of work. But I would say I've seen the value of thinking in a portfolio, and I sort of advocate that when I get the chance, because that's what makes the return work.
Okay. Well, there's one maybe that goes hand in hand with this a little bit. Does any of the Sheridan building use geothermal energy? And what is your take on its use and efficiency?
Yeah, you ask a question that tugs at me a bit. I don't want to sound negative in the answer. There is a place for geothermal energy, and geo-exchange as sort of a companion idea, this idea of sort of thermal storage in the ground. These are really powerful concepts. It gets very easy to make it a go-to concept where the implication is I'll create a loop. It doesn't matter what kind of building I'm attaching it to, the quality it's in, but I'll create a geothermal network, I'll attach it to a heat pump, and that'll be my best system configuration. I'd say a little more thought into that could yield the best answer of that. Sorry, I'm talking around it a little bit, but an integrated network gives you this possibility of centralizing your energy supply. And you can actually use that centralized model in a way that takes some very traditional technology and things like geothermal and geo-exchange and can actually bundle those in a way that makes them really, really effective. So I've seen sort of two sides of the conversation. One that's a very quick, this is the way we ought to do it, with a very high capital cost and effectiveness that's, decent but could be better. And then some implementations where they've really evolved it and thought about what's the exact precise role of geothermal and geo-exchange in my system. So I'm not knocking it. I think as Sheridan campuses evolve, it'll be a component of what we put in the network, but it builds on what we've already created on the campus. It'll actually be an adder.
All right. I have two questions here that can be combined. The first one is from Henry Moore, and that can be combined with Norma Gamble's. So Guelph tried district energy in downtown and had great resistance. What needs to happen to push the concept on new business, commercial or residential builds? And that leads into Norma's question. If you're able to partner with the builders of affordable housing, for example.
Yeah, like Guelph is a super interesting story. I had some tangential work in that one. So this is a community that created a community energy plan. We were looking at the end of my presentation at community energy plans, and Guelph had a very good one that it built. Took a long time to kind of get around to what are the actual first steps of it. But about 5 years in, they got to that district energy strategy. Let's get this implemented. And began cooking up the really detailed business plan for a utility-driven entity that would create these district energy networks. And they had a number of sites in mind. Hanlon Business Park, which actually has an implementation, was one of their first ones. They really wanted to access the Sleeman Brewery. They wanted to access the Linamar area. They thought maybe around the hospital there's a node, and they had a plan for how on a municipal scale this could roll out. I suspect there probably were some issues with, how do I get the first and second and third consumers connected and sell them into the system? But I think there was also around that time some politicking that came along and said, everything district energy is bad, and it's perhaps found a tractable audience. And I may be simplifying it. I'm not a resident of Guelph, and I wasn't involved in the politics of the day, but I do get the sense that it was a good plan that got tanked by a number of factors that were not all about its technological soundness. And I would say that the revisiting of that with our Energy Guelph and this kind of new iteration tells you it is still an idea that has value and the community sees the value. So now we come into these other communities, they are looking at this different lens, different time, different urgency in the climate conversation. Some of the same factors still exist, which is what entity is going to actually drive it and own it? How are we going to get those first consumers connected and actually using it, particularly the big anchor nodes? And you're right about the developer question, because there are two sites that are going to be the most likely for a district energy implementation. An area where I'm increasing the density. So in other words, I'm urbanizing, like say a midtown Oakville. That's a place where I put it. But then also anywhere I have a greenfield development, I want to create a near net zero development there. And I will want a district energy system in there. I will want a node there. That means the developer is vested in making that decision, and getting them to that point becomes really paramount to making that happen. So we learned from Guelph that politics matter, that policy matters, that we can't just have a technical solution that's brilliant. We need to have political solutions that make sense, developers on board, and all your customers on. It's a balanced decision that has to all happen at the same time.
Okay. Thank you. And before I go on to the next question, a shout out from Norma. She said it's not a question, just enormous admiration and wild applause to this presentation.
Thank you.
With this, our next question from Jeremy Thomas. With composting initiatives, they exist in many North American jurisdictions, including most in Southern Ontario. Composting programs don't exist in all of North American jurisdictions. Tennessee is one example where the infrastructure to support compost doesn't exist, though advocacy exists for such programs in the state. How does Sheridan address gaps in knowledge among students from jurisdictions where composting initiatives don't exist?
Okay, I might answer that in a couple of roundabout ways, so I apologize if I'm talking around it a little. One of the really interesting things with the whole signage conversation is we exist in Halton and we exist in Peel, and we have students who come from a broader geography. So they are all encountering within their individual home district some different mode of what's acceptable in a recycling bin, whether we actually do organics recycling. It's pretty universal in Ontario at the moment. But this idea that not every jurisdiction is going to treat it the same. And then we bring in international students who may or may not have, they'll have more or less sophisticated resource management practices where they come from. And they may actually come to the campus and be completely perplexed at the fact that we sort anything. So, so there has been this real push on our part to bring our Mission Zero volunteers, our students, and get them out with their peers and say, here's what actually happens. Here's how we sort this. And here's what happens with the product that we collect. So onto the composting question. This is something that we've been really kind of digging into. So our initial push, I said, we created 3 bins. We separated out organics. The organics, as collected, were sent off to London, Ontario, where they're basically created a waste to energy. We had in mind that still represents a tremendous cost burden to the institution and a tremendous carbon penalty for all the trucks and all the weight that's going out to London. And we wanted to see if we could begin to entertain this conversation of the local composting. So it comes back to how much contamination is in the organic stream that we're dealing with in an education campaign. And it comes to sort of the practical aspects of siting the composting on our campus. I don't know if this entirely answers the question, but we're really, really still interested in that conversation. There are a number of reasons we haven't managed to implement it yet, but it's not from the desire to do it. And I think that when we actually are able on campus to demonstrate this real circularity, this idea that this organic waste ends up producing the compost that we're using then to grow food, which they see in the community gardens and the food gardens, we're creating visually and in a very demonstrable way, here is how this circle works. And then I think that helps that perplexed student who walks into our campus and says, why do we even have this green bin, to then actually walk out back and see how it all connects together. So I think that's maybe how we get at the business of helping people from different places see it.
Right. I have several more questions, which is great. The next one from Betty Jo Parent. Are any other campuses reaching out to you to learn so they can do something like Sheridan has been doing? Yes.
Yeah. It's actually been, remember, like one of our ambitions was role model, and those are gratifying. One of our local colleges has been involved, I guess 2-3 years now, in planning out their hot water district energy network, and have asked us repeatedly for technical advice, really on what are the characteristics of the engineers and consultants we should use. Can you review what they've sent us and see if this makes sense? How do the financials work? All of those kinds of questions we share. And then a really nice one that's come up is actually across the border in Michigan. There's a college there, a local community college kind of associated with the Ford plant. And they've been wanting to do an entire energy master plan, really similar to the way Sheridan did it. And we advised them for a number of months. Then they came up and saw what we did, asked us tons of questions. They've asked us to be technical advisors to review the work they're getting. So we've had these opportunities here and there to actually provide support for others who are trying to answer those same questions. It's been really great.
Well, that's wonderful to hear that other institutions and schools are interested in that kind of future. Now, a question from Yuan Hosu. I hope I pronounced that correctly. Would you consider other alternative methods of saving energy?
I'm not quite sure how I would describe that. one of the things that I would think it's a particular obsession of mine, and it comes out of that Trias Energetica. But I'm really, really focused on how do we get good buildings, and this is a really, for me, like a kind of an intricate and somewhat nuanced conversation. There is like a passive house, amazingly insulated, airtight, certified, triple pane, amazing building. A standard exists for that. We actually have some examples around us. A pretty good amount of expense, a very good performance. The nuance here is there's got to be a tipping point where that building is good enough. It is really good. It's a lot better than what Ontario code would ask. But perhaps it's not as far as passive house, but it would have characteristics like a very good building envelope, an airtight building envelope, windows that don't create a lot of direct solar gain, either by orientation, size, or shading. These are the things that I think about in terms of new campus build, where I think a lot of what we could do to really push the energy out of the campus design is just simply build better. And that's not necessarily incredibly sophisticated technologies and amazingly complicated systems. It's actually some pretty primitive stuff in terms of the orientation of the building and what materials we choose. And I think that that's the way we, I guess in an alternative format, is really how we get low carbon campuses and low carbon communities when we start building new. So I'm sorry if it's not directly to your question, but that was sort of my interpretation of it is, I think it really is about taking a systematic approach and thinking carefully about what you're trying to do in the overall picture. And it starts in a lot of cases with what's consuming the energy in the first place.
All right. Well, I find the orientation part of orienting a building very interesting because quick example before the next question, our own building is facing due south with a relatively big overhang. And in the winter with a nice sunny day, it gets super warm. I would have never thought that possible.
Yeah.
And this kind of brings me to Jack Tacoma. He has a couple of questions. So the first one kind of with the energy load, what was the energy load for this newest building? He would like to know, and if you have any comments on cost and benefit.
Yeah, okay, so this building is, it's actually a mix of uses. It's a building that's meant to have student clubs, athletics, and even some Sheridan governance kind of function in the middle of it. So, yeah, there's kitchens on one floor and a conference room on another floor. So it's all over the place in terms of what floor uses what energy. So the more intensive ones, we've said they're about 110 kilowatt hours a square meter a year. The conference center rooms, the lighter ones, they're about 70. So somewhere in the middle of that, this building's going to blend into the 80s, which will have it quite a bit lower than the building next to it. And again, considerably lower than code at the time. I think it was something like 25 to 30% below the sort of model national code. So it's quite a significant energy performer, even with all, kitchens running and all kinds of strange functions in it. And a lot of that has to do with just good building envelope and pretty simple mechanical.
All right. Few more. Well, Todd Barsanti would like to know, or said that you had some illustration of future plans for the Oakville campus. Could you speak to other plans for the new campus in the next 30 years?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. And Todd is my colleague at Sheridan. Hello, Todd. Yeah, we've recently done a full campus master plan. And this was an interesting exercise for us because we, for years and years, had done master planning work whenever we wanted to put a new building up, and the town was basically asking us, so, you know, what does this look like in the scheme of what you want to build on the campus? So this was our opportunity to engage the entire Sheridan community in a conversation about what shall we transform ourselves into over the next 30 years. You know, it's another one of these that we did on the energy side and we hadn't really done in the built environment side. But with that vision, we talked a lot more about campuses that become a bigger part of community. If you look at a Sheridan campus today, it's parking lots to the front and the buildings are retreated back from the road. So we look like this insular campus that doesn't want to talk to anybody. And it's definitely not who we are. So our campuses don't represent Sheridan's culture or thinking. So this is an effort on our part to really push ourselves out to the road, to create some more dense forms and actually create community that's on our campus, not just a student community, but actually a community of you know, kind of all ages and interests. And so this is this we see mapped, particularly Oakville and Brampton. The campus designs have emerged in a way that we're talking about placemaking. We're talking about having these wonderful trail systems that connect to and through the campus and open up all of that natural amenity around us. Oakville campus sits on the top side of West Morrison Creek. It's a beautiful ravine. That's a wonderful feature, but it's hidden. Brampton campus has this wonderful pond that sits next to Fletcher's Creek that runs there, and that's hidden back behind everything. So we, you know, part of our interest then in campus master planning was, how do we open this up? How do we make community? How do we make place? And then comes the conversation, and the kind of the overlay of that is what constitutes a great building in that space, that it's both iconic and energy performing. And how do we then use this methodology we've evolved over our work of interconnecting things and taking advantage of centralizing all of this infrastructure to build out low carbon sources of energy to provide heating and cooling to all of that new building? How do we integrate more of the renewables onto the buildings or in different places on our campuses so that it's sort of powered and contained in itself? And maybe really importantly, how do we reinforce this connection with the natural environment and actually celebrate it on the campuses? And so that's all part of that campus master plan. It's, I think, in bits and pieces on the web at this point. I believe, you know, we'd anticipated we were going to have a grand launch and tell everybody all the cool things about it. And then COVID happened and we kind of withdrew from it a little bit, but it's all coming. And we welcome conversations on it.
All right. Well, Catherine Socle, first of all, congratulate Sheridan College for being the first of Ontario's post-secondary institutions to sign on to the UN Sustainable Development Goals Accord. Could you tell us more about how energy sustainability promotes the SDG Accord?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I was very excited about the SDG Accord. So there's a couple of components to the work. My office is looking obviously at some very operational elements. We're, you know, again, we're sitting in facilities, so we're thinking all about, you know, the built environment, the campus master plan, these whole pieces. And we recognize energy sustainability as, you know, impacting in particular our contribution to a warming climate, to a heating climate and a climate emergency, and our responsibility just to mitigate that as much as possible. But we recognize that the impact beyond that, when we're thinking impact of climate, is unfairly borne across the world. It's not us that's necessarily suffering the worst ravages of a climate crisis. It's happening across the globe from us. And if we're preaching global citizenship and being responsible, it's clear that a practice that sees us emitting more and more carbon would be completely inconsistent with that. So I just want to sort of fold to the second piece of that, though. The work of the Office for Sustainability has taken us to the point where we've recognized that the institution needs to be able to talk about its impacts. I'm seeing this actually more and more kind of in the post-secondary conversation and beyond. But very early for us was this notion that it could be very easy to make a laundry list of things we ought to do as an institution to be sustainable, to just start focusing on doing those and put the blinders on and kind of focus on doing that. It doesn't lead us to a space where we're able to look at the decision we're making day to day in a holistic context and say it's having this impact and that impact and we're affecting these groups. So we were very interested in getting Sheridan into that conversational mindset of how do we think about impact. SDGs have really kind of lit up the conversation in the broader context around us. At first, I thought the conversation would be more about the Made at Sheridan impact approach. And I realized that somewhere along the way that the SDG conversation was coming up right alongside it. And so that's the alignment that kind of got us onto SDG Accord. It seems that the Accord and the popularity of the SDGs came to us at a right time where we could sort of pick it up and adopt it. And it aligned very much with the way we were thinking about energy creates impact, purchasing creates impact, access to education creates impact. Our EDI practices create impact, and we need to understand what those are.
All right. Our next question is from our past district governor, Kathleen Dick, and actually that I'm wondering about this, the answer you're going to give to that one is, she lived in Denmark in the 1970s, and the home there was heated by steam from an incinerator plant.
Yeah.
Are you looking at this as well? And it also would help with the waste disposal as opposed to going to a landfill.
Yeah. I would say that has to be a little further out for us. It's really, I found that really, really interesting. Had the opportunity in Sweden to tour a few incinerating plants. One in particular outside Stockholm was adjacent to a fossil fuel plant. It was sort of combusting a bit of oil with some waste. And then another that was modern and combusting waste. So the modern one, you could only see the smallest wisp of steam out of its stack. The fossil fuel one, now dated back a few decades, you could see pretty visibly the plume on it. So I come to Canadian context, and we're reticent to have this conversation about it, incinerating waste or treating waste as a resource. The story that the Swedes shared with me is, really about, 96% of the stuff that's produced that is recyclable will be reclaimed. And it's about the 4% that's kind of end of life that are really not getting useful function on a recycle is the stuff that's ending up in the incinerator. I don't know if that's the truth of the situation, but it's compelling to me because I like the idea that we're maximizing the use of the resource, and when it has no longer tangible value as product and can't be turned around again, that at least we're going to reclaim the energy value of that. So I'm fascinated by that conversation, how it practically renders to our campus. I think the likely way we'd come at it is to take organic material and consider creating a biogas and sort of using that in a combustion process or something similar to that. I have not envisioned or imagined that we're going to begin incinerating in the style that Europeans do, really because the permitting and public perception is not in a place that makes that an easy conversation to get into right now.
All right. Well, there's another question. We're down to the last couple. Mary Visser Kerr She says that she often sees methane burned off with no purpose.
Yeah.
She asked if this heat could effectively be used to distill water.
The heat can be reclaimed, period. Whatever function we're going to do with it, the fact that it's flared is a waste, and it's creating GHG emissions. It becomes a very quick way to deal with methane gas produced off wastewater treatment. It becomes a convenient way to pipe and pull methane out of landfills in places where it was going to collapse the landfill or create other problems. But then the quickest, easiest solution, cheapest solution would seem to just put it in the jet and flare it. Slightly more complicated in the payback equation is, how do I get that captured and put it to some use? So the interesting piece of this, I'll just share a quick story. There's a jurisdiction where there's a nuclear plant. I think it's about 20 miles away from this urban center that has a district energy system. The town at this point is considering running the actual pipe network to connect, so we can trap the thermal energy that would otherwise be rejected in the cooling towers and send it into the district heat system, which is, again, a pretty common model. The interesting piece of that is the financial feasibility of that project would not be there if not for the presence of the heat network. So these questions about these sources of energy we might be able to recapture, reclaim, become much more tangible, realizable when there's a network and a place to put the heat. So I'm sorry, I don't know that I could speak to the specifics of distilling water. It may be a good interim application or something that could be done where I don't have access to a heat network, where particularly pure clarified water might be a benefit, or perhaps used in the interim when I don't have a good use for that yet. So not a bad idea. I would love to see more heat networks that provide opportunity for reclaiming energy, make it more financially feasible for all kinds of projects.
All right. Well, we've had a lot of very interesting questions, and now we're getting to the last one from Lori Ossie. She says, there seems to be new energy in tackling the environmental issues. Do you agree? And how do you see things going forward? And she also says, by the way, energy efficient homes are quiet, very quiet.
So I didn't quite understand the first piece of the question. So
it says here, there seems to be new energy in tackling the environmental issues. Do you agree that there's this new energy, and how do you see things going forward? Like, I guess people energized, that's how I would understand it. Or movement.
Okay. I'm sorry that I'm probably not quite comprehending the question. Is it the people energy to actually tackle this environmental crisis? If that's sort of the question at the guts of it, I think there's a groundswell of interest in that. Virtually anyone I talk to says, this is a priority. It's something we've got to get to. The really interesting piece of that is, we watch municipality after municipality declare a climate emergency. So you've defined a climate emergency. You've said this is something of urgency we must address. Where is the mobilization around an energy conversation when you've declared an emergency akin to a public health crisis like COVID? How did we mobilize for COVID, and how did we mobilize for an energy crisis? And the answers are very, very different. So part of the guts of that, I think, in unpacking that conversation is, what is it that is presenting a barrier for actual action on the energy file and the energy file in relation to environment? And I think the answer lays somewhere in understanding where to start and how to progress. This absence of a roadmap is kind of a piece of it. In other words, what do I have to plan into? Where do I start? This looks intractable at first, and we can see the top of the mountain. We're at the bottom of it. What are we supposed to do in between? So in a lot of cases, it's getting the community together and saying, how are we going to scale this mountain? Then in other cases, as we've kind of defined that, there is all of the business of how do we align and mobilize the social and financial capital in the community to actually make that happen now. And it's the piece I think a politician wants to be responsive to the climate crisis, wants to answer, but then also realizes that the levers they have as a municipality are to collaborate, engage, pull together a community, but not necessarily to generate all of the solutions that are required to address a climate crisis. So there they are now waving the flag for the cause and hoping that the community is going to rally around that. And I think that's where these engaged conversations, these ability to pull together the stakeholders at the right time and convene those sessions where we talk about it as a community are the things that create the motion. So it's not the underlying will that's the problem. It's just how do we now climb that mountain?
I hope, Lori, that was an answer to the question. And well, with this is well, we had so many questions, and I will pass it on to our district governor, Mike Lori, who will say a few words now. Mike, over to you.
Thank you, Suzanne. Professor Sinnock, thank you for joining us tonight. This was our leadoff series in our environmental speaker activities, and I thank you for setting the bar so high. You brought with you a deep understanding, but a capacity of conveying complex ideas in ways that all of us, I'm sure, can understand. And we had 40 Rotarians and Rotaractors tonight eager to hear a message perhaps of hope, but certainly of realism. And I think your pride in Sheridan College and the work that has been going on at the various campuses was a great model to draw on as the basis of your talk. Using good science, best practices, and innovation, great things have been accomplished. I see that where it says Sheridan, it says get creative, and I think you have lived that motto. We hope that some of these ideas have stuck with us, and we can be curious, bring these things back into our homes, into our lives, into our families and our Rotary clubs, and back to the community, because we all need to be commandos in this action on behalf of our environment. In recognition of your presentation tonight, we will make a donation to the Rotary Foundation and have it designated for environmental projects. And we thank you so much. Thank you also to NAGWA for making this introduction, to Suzanne, Darren, and the Environment Committee for setting this up. I think you have given us much food for thought. It has been a buffet of great ideas. Thank you once again.
Well, thank you very much, District Governor Mike. With this, well, I have certainly nothing to add to these words of thanks. And I thank you, Professor Sinnock, for a really interesting and educational presentation. And I could have just listened for many more hours, but we have a limited amount of time. And with this, thank you again to everybody who attended this first event of this series. And we are looking forward to having you all come back to any future events. So kind of stay tuned. And I'm sure we'll have more coming. And with this, thanks again, and have a wonderful evening. Stay well, stay healthy, and until we see each other again.
I have to say something. Thank you. Thank you, Herbert. I know how busy you are. I I lived the journey with you. I was the receiver. You were the creator. And I just received what you have done in the environment. So I thank you very much to give us the time and give us such kind of ideas, which we would be trying to spread in our communities. As we are Rotarian, we are hoping to change lives. So thank you for your insights and for your models. And we have to now go for our own journey and wish to have success like you. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing time with me tonight. It's really my pleasure to talk about it. And you reach out by email or LinkedIn if you want to talk further. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.